Welcome to the Brunenburg Agricultural Museum. A castle and an agricultural museum, how do these two things fit together? Well, long before the castle was built, around 1240, the locals called this place Brunneberg, Fountain Hill, because of the many springs gushing out from the ground. The sunny slopes high above the swamps and above the flatlands, subject to inundations in the bottom of the valley, and a mild climate made for ideal conditions for the cultivation of cereals and the growing of vines. Later, in the Middle Ages, the nobility would build its castles in prominent places. Archaeological finds, such as rotary mills, attest to the long history of agriculture on this site. Early on, water was collected for irrigation purposes in so-called Chötten, water reservoirs, so as to distribute it through fields and vineyards with canals and aqueducts. The special challenge of growing and harvesting crops of all kinds on a steep slope is what this museum is all about. First, we shall turn to a topic which challenged the ingenuity and inventiveness of mountain farmers in a particular way: how to transport crops, dung, wood, hay, and bedding on these extreme slopes. Up until the 1950s, all the crops harvested on the Brunenburg farm had to be carried on people's shoulders, since the steepness of the terrain made the use of tractors practically impossible, as in most Tyrolean mountain farms. The first cables for simple cable cars were introduced around 1900. Hay, wood, and bedding for animals could be brought down from Alpine meadows and from the woods that way. Let us return to the older forms of transportation, carrying and dragging. The real difference between life in the flatlands and survival on steep slopes meant that here everyone, children, women, old people, all had to carry their own share. What tools would be used and how depended on the parts of the body that was used to carry: hands, arms, head, shoulder, hip, back, and of course any combination of these. With a crate, or with a carrying board called melter, girls would balance the food on their heads, which they would bring out to the workers in the fields. Perhaps the simplest carrying implement was discovered when man first put a stick over his shoulder and used it as a carrying implement. This basic notion was refined by Tyrolean mountain farmers when they developed a specialized tool, the so-called Kornspiss, a corn pike, still used in the Schnalz Valley. It is a wooden pike with a rounded handle and a flat surface that rests on the shoulder. The sheaves are tied together with a leather rope. The farmer then sticks the pike into the bundle and lifts it onto his shoulders.
Werft op een vis drauf und dann wirft man mehrfach Woll. So. Und dann holt man den nächsten. Fasst man so. Hier. Stoppt ein bisschen das Land. Und dahinter zu. Ich denke, das wäre nicht mal gut her. Ja. Mehr sein eben nicht. Dann sagt man eben eine Nummer. Unterbouwen, runterbouwen, so. Nachher steckt man daneben durch. Und dann zieht man eben zusammen. Erst und steckt unter der Spaulinie. So, jetzt passt danach tut man so hier und da hat man und geht man so drin, so schön herlassen. Na, jetzt geht man da dazu. So geht man rot,
Carrying on a steep slope requires special skill in lifting your load, knowing how to position yourself, taking into account the various gravitational pulls. The contemporary use of two carrying sticks led to the development of further implements. One of these stands out for its ingenuity, the board bird or Flickenvogel, used to carry long wooden boards which were needed to line aqueducts or for other purposes. One of the crucial aspects of carrying is the proper distribution of weight. It should be as close as possible to the perpendicular axis of the human body. The board bird allows the boards to stick out over your head while the weight comes to rest evenly on your shoulders. Of course, if people had no heads, one would not require such a tool. That is why in the Passaier Valley, if you behave stupidly, you may be told that you would make a perfect board carrier. A related tool is the mortar board or Maltavogel. In the Middle Ages, cathedrals and castles were built using this tool to carry up the mortar needed for construction. In the Upper Finchgau, we run into a carrying implement which combines a carrying stick and a crate. It was used to carry hay a short way from the barn to the stable where the animals were kept. Many were the tools developed in different valleys to bring in hay. Around here in the Finchgau and in Passaier, the hay fork or Heipferkel was the preferred implement. Its name derives from the Latin furcula, meaning a fork. In this case, a forked branch, connected by a crosspiece to which a long leather rope is attached. Here we see Isidor Blas from Tschengels in the Upper Finchgau making a ferkel from a forked birch wood branch. How this highly efficient tool was used, we can see here on the slopes of the Schnalz Valley. The loading of the hay fork requires special care. The hay is stacked carefully on the outstretched rope. Each bundle collected with the rake is perfectly aligned to the next. 6 or 7 of these bundles usually make up one load. Now comes the hard part, heaving the ferkel, which can weigh more than 150 pounds. You need the proper combination of pull, heave and swing, dosed just rightly so that the gravitational swing won't make you tumble downhill. If a load isn't properly stacked or bound lopsidedly, the whole thing may come apart. In that case, you will hear the ironic comment, "Your ferkel has calved." There were ferkels of all sizes, since women and children would also help carry the hay. In other areas of Tyrol, one prefers the hay blanket, used also to carry sheaves of cereals. Here we see a farmer in Langtaufers stacking sheaves of barley on his carrying blanket, binding it and then carrying it to his barn. Also in this case, the weight is distributed on head, neck and shoulders. Another carrying implement made out of cloth is the apron, used in sundry shapes and colors. The blue apron used to be part of the Tyrolean everyday costume. It comes in particularly handy when collecting walnuts and chestnuts, or when you need to take along some tools or some food out into the fields or vineyards. The following tools are characterized by straps, indeed a revolutionary invention in the realm of transportation. It is uncertain whether Ötzi knew about the use of straps. With the use of straps, a crate could be carried on one's back, leaving your arms and hands free. That is how a simple bag was transformed into a backpack or rucksack. One could use willows to make such straps, which were braided together and then applied to your container. The crux is a wooden frame with straps designed to carry things on your back. The frame may have a loading platform, i.e. a horizontal board on which to place whatever you need to carry, or else the frame may be V-shaped, as we see in this picture. Such a V-shaped carrying frame is at the core of the very particular hay cracks, or Haikraxe, used in Schnalztal. As we see here, it has, in addition, a further small frame jutting out in front, so as to be able to load more hay on it. Here, Josef Tapiner, in Unsere Frau im Wald, tries to bring in an oversized load of hay, battling with the wind, which could easily topple him over. Finally, we should not forget the carrying frame used by specialized carriers. For centuries, such carriers represented the backbone of Tyrolean trade across mountain passes and political borders. In this case, there are two carrying platforms, one at the back and one over the carrier's head. A special small cushion would make for easier carrying with one's head. The Tyrolean painter Jacob Placidus Altmutter drew the encounter of a Kraxenträger with a family of Karner, Tyrolean itinerant tinkers or chestnut roasters. Undoubtedly, the woven basket with straps was the most widespread carrying implement in Tyrol. There were special sizes depending if you wanted to carry grass, hay, leaves or bedding, earth or dung. And there were small sizes for children as well, as everyone had to do their share of carrying. Itinerant craftsmen such as shoemakers, weavers and carpenters who worked on different farms, mostly through the winter months, would have special toolboxes with straps for the tools of their trade. An essential carrying implement for viticulture on steep slopes is the zum, a wooden bucket with straps used to bring in the grapes during harvest. Here we see Sepp Prünster carrying up grapes from the Schlossacker to the Brunenburg cellar. So far we have dealt with carrying by humans, but what about animals used for transportation? Pack horses, mules and donkeys have played an important role since times immemorial and were crucial for mining activities in the Alps. Even dogs with pack saddles were used in such mines. But only wealthy farmers could afford a pack horse or mule. Therefore, you had professional samers, pack horse drivers, who provided secluded valleys with those things a farm could not provide itself: salt, wine, chestnuts, and the like. When cattle was driven up to summer pastures, pack horses were used to carry up needed food supplies. A fresco in the Eagle Tower shows how the city was supplied with fresh milk by means of pack horses. These same animals brought cereals to the mill and flour back to the farm in leather bags. One of the greatest inventions of all times, the wheel, had only limited function on steep slopes. So it is not surprising to discover that more than wagons, it was a combination of the forecarriage with two beams that acted as runners that was used on steep slopes. On the two runners that were dragged along, one could place big crates for dung, turnips or potatoes or bedding, but also big barrels of wine or wooden vats for grapes. A job that required particular skill was the pulling of frozen dung blocks, Mischknollzirken, as they say in Tyrol. The dung that would accumulate during the summer would be packed into a wooden mold. The square blocks were then left to freeze over the winter months. While there was still snow on the ground, the frozen blocks of dung would be tied to each other. The men would then slide with them down to the fields. One would sit in front of the block, in which he inserted a stick that he used to steer the whole train downhill. Another winter job which took advantage of the possibility to glide down snowy slopes involved hay and firewood. Back to Cengels in Finchgau. To bring down branches to be used as firewood, they are stacked so that the lower one will act as runner, on which the so-called bots, a simple sled, will glide. While this is an ephemeral tool, once the load is brought in, all of the branches become firewood. Farmers also developed lightweight sleds, which could be carried up the mountains and be used over and over again. Here we see Tony Seber dragging in kindling wood for his stove. Heavier sleds were needed to bring in leaves or fallen spruce needles to be used as bedding for animals.
Så. Så hukte det ett tjänk. Så vet man när det är mold.
The same is true for sleds used to take out dung to the fields, as shown here on the slopes of the Mühlwaldtal. If we were to sum up the crucial aspects of carrying, dragging, or sliding on mountain slopes, these would be the most important ones. Shore footing, which can be increased by appropriate shoes with nailed soles or crampons, and possibly a walking stick. The most advantageous distribution of the weight, so as to avoid unnecessary effort. Skill in loading, bundling and binding, whatever needs to be transported. And finally, when sliding down icy slopes, the ability to control the force of gravity so that it may act to your own advantage and not result in a fatal disadvantage. As we are told in the 23rd book of the Iliad, the woodcutter is far better for metis than he is for brute strength. It is by metis that the sea captain holds his rapid ship, where metis stands for the manual skill which Tyrolean farmers describe as furtel, i.e. craftiness combined with skill and dexterity. In this museum you will find other tools used for transportation. They all attest to the inventiveness of mountain farmers when it came to bring in their crops and to fight for survival.
Hierzulande den Steilhang gemeistert haben.